see when it's done.
Okay. So, thank you for coming to this meeting today about the NHS. We're really pleased to have Dr. Bob Gill with us today. And the opportunity to watch just some little bits of his documentary, The Great NHS Heist, which will be available via a link that we'll send to you afterwards. So Bob has worked in the NHS as a GP for more than 20 years and has directly experienced the ideological assault on the NHS. And I'm going to quote him here. He says, "Defunding, outsourcing and marketisation has squandered billions, made my job harder and for my patients more frustrating with delays, fragmentation and, in some cases, preventable harm." I expect that we'll also discuss today and draw out the proposed health and care bill. The bill, of course, is the latest assault on the NHS after 40 years of privatisation and efficiency savings. We know that the bill will fundamentally undermine the central principles of the NHS as envisaged by Bevan and set out in here. So over to Bob now, then we'll be over to the film and back again. Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you, Esther. Thanks for inviting me. I just want to set out how the film came about, and then hopefully we can just watch the intro and skip to the most relevant section, which tells you our Christmas future. The film came about because our media isn't telling us what's going on. That's the fundamental problem. We have a sham of democracy whereby we're made decisions based on lies and slogans. If people who are in the dark cannot make an informed decision. So when we vote, we're not voting on information. So there's a huge vacuum of facts and reality. We're living in a virtual reality where the BBC is as much as we're allowed to know, and the BBC shapes our understanding of the world to suit the establishment. Now, as Esther pointed out, the last 4 decades we've had a stealth privatization, and we are approaching the end game. The health bill that's before us is the final piece of the jigsaw, which will transition us to the American healthcare system. So if we're ready, I'll just play you the intro, then I'll come back. Thank you.
I want America to have the finest health care in the world. And I want every American to be able to have that care when he needs it.
There's millions of people here that don't have access or can't afford the care that they need.
You'd never look at this country and say we want to have what the United States has.
Of the 29 million people who are uninsured this year, about 29,000 of them will die unnecessarily.
These companies are in the business to make money. There always has to be enough of a margin for them to satisfy Wall Street.
I am so grateful and so amazed and happy that RAM is here and put this on, because there are so many people like myself that don't have health care.
I became a doctor to help people. I became a doctor because I want to look after people in the best possible way. And mostly I wanted to be a doctor in the NHS because I can make those decisions without ever having to think about how much that person earns or insurance qualifications.
The Thatcher regime certainly put in an important amount of the preparation for privatisation, but in order to pull off the whole plan, it was necessary to put it in the hands of a business-friendly opposition party.
We've never voted on the privatisation of the health service. It's just happened in subterfuge. It's happened by demonising people who work in the health service, like the junior doctors who are presented as not wanting to give up their weekends. I mean, what a lie that is.
It is in the sights and the targets of the multinational corporations.
I think everything with the trade deal is on the table, so NHS or anything else, or a lot more than that.
So that just gives you a flavour. Be in no doubt, who's taking over the NHS is the American corporations. The NHS will be turned into a funding stream for private corporations, and the fundamental concept you have to get your head around, and it seems difficult, but unless we face the reality we can't fight back effectively, is the deliberate denial of care to sick people, knowing full well they'll die or suffer and then die in order to make profit. Now, Esther mentioned one word, efficiency. Whenever I hear a politician say efficiency, I reinterpret that word to mean, how can I line my own pockets and my corporate friends' pockets? Because that's what's happened. The NHS used to be beautifully efficient, 4% running cost. Now, estimates are between 16 and 20%. The efficient model we're following spends 36% on administration. What does administration mean? Chief executive pay packets, shareholder value, and the massive bureaucracy that is required to carry out this elaborate con. It is huge. What's happened to the NHS in terms of its ethos and who runs the NHS? Well, the original Beveridge model was very slimline. You had doctors and nurses, generally of significant experience, working in the hospital that they're making decisions about, running the show. Now you have a huge tier of senior management and administrators underneath them who are totally divorced from delivering care. So you have a separation between responsibility and power, and the people in place in those key positions of power are selected to be a certain sort of person, to blindly implement what they're told to implement, irrespective of the cost. And I mean cost in terms of the effect on the staff, but also in terms of the effect on patients. There is a total disconnect. So that means there are several victims in this crime. You have the taxpayer who's being fleeced. You have the patients who are languishing, waiting to get into hospital, sometimes not even getting that far, but waiting for an ambulance at home. And you have the staff who are totally disempowered, and there are many incentives for them to remain quiet. They're broken. NHS staff are broken, and they make sure, even if you have the idea of speaking up and telling the public what's really going on, they make a spectacle of crushing whistleblowers. It only takes one or two people to speak up in a trust for their fate to be known by the others, then that will silence the whole institution. Unlike the films and dramas we see on telly, where every time I see a situation like this, the lone, determined, heroic figure is victorious against the institution, that is a fantasy. There is a whole army of people who have been crushed by the institution, because that is necessary to carry this out. How else could you do it? So we have the regulatory bodies like the CQC. These are not designed to work in our favor. They are designed to give the mirage of regulation and oversight. Most of the money to these bodies like the Care Quality Commission is spent at the people who are selected to lead these organizations. There's hardly any money to investigate stuff. How bad has the situation got? So if I put it to you that a government could issue an instruction that would force the whole medical community to discharge potentially infectious people into nursing homes, setting off a pandemic of 20,000 deaths, 20 to 25,000 deaths in a democracy, would you believe that was possible? That's exactly what happened. Where were the medical professionals and the Royal Colleges and the unions? Where was the walkout from these hospitals? Where were the doctors and nurses pleading with the public on social media, this is a disaster waiting to happen? Now, I might have missed it, but I paid close attention to these things. Did any of you see a mass awakening of these people speaking out? You did.
I'm sorry for interrupting, Bob. It's nice to meet you. I'm Terry from Plymouth.
Can we have questions later, please? We'll have a time for questions.
Okay. I'm not aware of a significant backlash. So in effect, we had a government that was able to exercise a cull of the elderly. Is this the first time this has happened? Well, since the 2008 crash, our government's decided to impose economic sanctions on its own population, otherwise known as austerity. And what did those economic sanctions do? Led to an estimated 130,000 deaths, according to academics, who look into what would have happened to life expectancy and compared it to other similar economies. So the UK managed to speed up the demise of 130,000 people. We also saw a stalling of life expectancy, a rise in infant mortality. These are very hard endpoints that are telling us that our health system is failing. Not just because of cuts to healthcare, but also cuts to social care, which have been huge, 40% in that order over the decade. What's happened in the pandemic? Well, leading up to the pandemic, how was the NHS? Was it fighting fit? Am I here defending the NHS in its current state? Absolutely not. It is dysfunctional, particularly if you look at the emergency care. Elective routine care seems to be functioning well, but if you go to any A&E or you went to an intensive care unit, you'd find there are people who need urgent treatment who are waiting. There are people who need urgent treatment who are dying, and there are people who need intensive care beds. There's no bed for them. Now, that was before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we had 10,000 doctor vacancies, 40,000 nurse vacancies, and we had cut 38,000 beds. Now, anybody with a soul and a conscience and an insight into what government policy had done over the last 40 years might at this point say, hang on, we've made a mistake with this privatization. It's going to kill a lot of people. Let's change our minds. Let's change direction. What did the government do? It announced a herd immunity policy, right? It did nothing to stem the spread of the pandemic. And when it did decide to do something, it decided the best way to spend £22 billion was to give it to an accountancy firm and an outsourcing giant, Deloitte and Serco, who have no experience in mounting a public health response. What would have been the rational thing to do if you wanted to preserve life and spend money well? The rational thing to do was to send money to local councils, make sure nursing homes were better funded, and to rebuild capacity within the NHS and listen to the experts that had been downgraded and shut down and outsourced ever since the 2012 Act. None of that happened. So there was a conscious political decision not to do the rational. And as a consequence, the former Chief Scientific Officer, David King, estimates that the government's handling of the pandemic not only massively expensive waste of money, but cost 100,000 lives. Now, is anybody keeping count of the number of preventable or premature deaths I've listed already? We're getting close to 250,000 people in the last decade died preventably or prematurely. That's quite a lot for a Western democracy that prides itself on an open media, supposedly. So they're not telling you this story, so it's down to people like myself and many people who supported me to tell you this. Because I'm no economist. I'm not a health policy analyst, but I've had to become one in order to translate what is potentially quite a complicated thing in a way that is believable based on an understanding of how the system has been deliberately run down. So what does the film hope to achieve? We want you to start thinking like a financier and a banker and a billionaire. Get into their head. What is the NHS to them? The NHS is not a beloved institution looking after everybody according to need and not the ability to pay. Come on. What planet are you on? That is not how they think of the NHS. They see the NHS as a significant part of the economy which they need to get their claws into to extract as much wealth out of it, irrespective of what the damage is done to patients who need care. So there's a siphoning operation going on. Okay? The NHS you can break down into 3 assets. You have the land and property. You have the patient data, which is a huge asset, commercially exploitable. And you have the budgets. Now, how did they steal the land? Well, we had a very good financial contract known as Private Finance Initiative, where we decided to saddle the NHS with a millstone of private debt constructed in such a way that early on it was quite affordable, but later on became more and more unaffordable. The servicing of the debt was protected and ring-fenced at the cost of providing services. So everything took a back seat if PFI was in the picture. Private Finance Initiative, rather than being an illustrious hospital building program, was the biggest hospital bed closure program. How? For every hospital they replaced, it had about 1/3 less hospital beds. Where were they located? Out of town. What happened to the previous hospital in the city centre on prime real estate? Sold off, turned into luxury flats. Yeah? And what are we saddled with? We've borrowed 11 billion, we're going to pay back 88 billion. Now, would you get a mortgage on those terms? If you would, come and speak to me afterwards, I can lend you some money. Is that bad enough? No, it isn't. Because at the end of the term, we don't own the hospitals. Can you believe it? The government has entered into a financial arrangement with the private sector at the end of which, paying through the nose over 30 to 50 years, you don't own the asset. We're on the hook for all of this, guys. So, we have constructed a financial mechanism to steal the land, to flog off the land, to steal the property, and in 2012 they created a company called NHS Property Services, PropCo, which has got one shareholder, the Secretary of State. Now, why would you do that? Why would you create an entity to which you can transfer all the assets the NHS has remaining? Why would you do that? Because in due course you're going to sell them off. So that's the land, that's one asset class the NHS has. Patient data. This country has, in the world, the best data set on patients anywhere else. Nobody else has got what we have. This is of huge value to big tech companies. Just imagine they have your social media footprint, they have your buying footprint, they have your health records, and we're investing very heavily as a taxpayer in developing a genomic database. Who's it for? It's not for us. It's to be given over to the court. Not even sold, given away. We are subsidizing our own theft. Yeah? It's like you finding a robber and saying, can you come and steal everything in my house and here's £1,000 for your troubles. That's what the government is doing to us. Now, data is valuable. I'm not a techie by any means. That's why I got so stressed up when they started saying, can you send me the link to the video, right? I'm not a techie, but believe me, it's of huge value. And very recently, in May of this year, whilst everybody was struggling with the pandemic and the vaccination program, the government quietly announced this plan to copy all your secret, confidential, private, sensitive information held by your GP onto a totally separate data bank to be used for commercial activity. Nothing to do with your healthcare, nothing to do with your hospital referrals, a copy, a duplicate copy. You get the drift. There's a pattern to all of this behaviour. It's not incompetence. And if I got paid £10 for everybody said what the politicians is doing is incompetent, it's very competent. It's just that they have clowns giving us sermons. They are personally incompetent, but the plan is not incompetent, and the policies are not incompetent. They don't write the policies. The policies come from the City of London, the financial sector, the real estate sector, and the insurance companies. These MPs aren't up to writing legislation. Come on. They don't write it. So that's the land, the data. Another part about the data, I've told you about the blatant external theft of your data. There is a subtle internal theft and control of your data, which has been happening over the years, which is for the use of the insurance industry. So already for over a decade, companies like United Health, which is America's biggest insurer, through their subsidiary Optum, have worked their way into the back office function of the NHS. So where I work in Sidcup in Kent, Optum is a lead provider for IT services. We're using their algorithms, their risk stratification tools, which all mean they need access to patient data. They're already in there. What I'm telling you is not some future threat, they're already there. So you have this internal data control and theft, and you had this blatant external data heist, which was announced in May. Now what's probably most important is the budgets. What is spent on healthcare? Now the billionaires and the bankers don't want money spent on fixing the plebs. That's not the point. That's just a necessary, avoidable byproduct of the business model. The business model is to develop as many siphoning channels, so to make as little as possible goes in the delivery of healthcare. Now that's how the insurers work. Yeah? Do insurers like high-risk people or low-risk people? They like low-risk people. How do they avoid the high-risk people? Well, they set in a system whereby as soon as you become high-risk, they've got various tricks to deny you care. So that's why it's very important for us to go to America and tell you how their system works. And that's a significant part of the film, because it is truly unbelievable what goes on there. Now, Michael Moore, hopefully you've heard of Michael Moore, makes documentaries. He made the film Sicko in 2007. If you haven't watched it, please watch it. That is our future. Sicko is about people who are insured. It doesn't look at the uninsured. It looks at the people with insurance who, when they become expensive, when they require a transplant, when they require chemotherapy, the insurance companies look at the small print of the medical records that the government have given them access to and say, well, you didn't declare this on the policy you took out, we're not going to give you the treatment. Or you didn't read the small print, we're only going to pay $500,000 for your cancer care. Anything after that is down to you. Who looks at their policies in the small print whenever they get cover? I don't. How do they make their money? Denial of care. There are other ways. Denial of care is number one, and what they call it to the stock exchange is a medical loss ratio. That's what you are when you get sick. You're a medical loss to the insurance industry, And the lower they can get their medical loss ratio, the greater the dividend, the greater the bonus for the chief executive. The whole structure, everybody in the system is motivated by performance-related pay and share options to act against your interest. Compassion, no. Evidence-based medicine, no, irrelevant. It's the bottom line. The system doesn't tolerate working any other way. So what does the new bill do? So you might not be aware, but the guy who's been heading up the NHS since 2014 is a guy called Simon Stevens. He has been groomed from a relatively young age to do what he's done. It's not been an unfortunate series of accidents. He was on the fast-track NHS management training scheme. He then became a health policy advisor to Tony Blair. He was instrumental in private finance initiative and the Concordat with the private sector in the early 2000s, Alan Milburn's baby. Between them, they got rid of the last health secretary we had that believed in the health service, Frank Dobson. He was pushed to the side, persuaded to run for London Mayor. Meanwhile, Simon Stevens was steering the ship towards the American insurance model. In 2004, he left to do a decade of work for United Health. And when he left, his job was president for global expansion for United Health. And then he came back to the NHS. Now, what do you think he's been doing since he's back in the NHS? Could he have been preparing the NHS for United Health's global expansion, perhaps? What do we think? Maybe? So he came out with two policy documents, a 5-year forward view, the NHS long-term plan. If you can stay awake long enough and read them, other than the very glossy summary at the beginning, which pledges undying love for Anara and Bevan and the NHS, if you get past that and you understand what they've been doing and you can put it into context, these are both blueprints to get us to the US system, right? So he's prepared the way, and now he has his bill before Parliament. His bill will create what are called managed care systems, the subject of Michael Moore's film, also exposed in the Nixon Watergate tapes by his advisor, who summed up the whole enterprise. I'll paraphrase: the less care you give them, the more money you make. That's from the horse's mouth. That's what it's all about. Now they keep changing the name. Integrated care is the latest. Other names were health maintenance organizations, accountable care organizations, sustainability and transformation plans, and the one that seems to have landed is integrated care systems. We are being hoodwinked. So how will it work? What the bill does, it gives legal footing to what's been going on for over a decade. In 2006, under the new Labour government, there was something called world-class commissioning, whereby they said, we're going to split the NHS up further into a purchasing arm and a providing arm, and in order for us to use the market expertise, we're going to bring in these people from the private sector, from United Health, from the big 4 accountancy firms, from McKinsey, the management consultants. We're going to bring these lovely people in who only want the best for everybody, and they're going to tell us how to run the NHS more efficiently. Aren't they lovely, right? They have been mutating the system quietly for over a decade. What this bill does, it just makes it all legal. Please, what I want you to take home is this is not some hypothetical future threat. It's been happening. in shadow form for years, and the integrated care systems gives it legitimacy. What else does an integrated system do? Well, it breaks the NHS up into 42 bodies. So in effect, you have a denationalisation. It gives these independent bodies a fixed budget, and the body has autonomy to create efficiency and value, translation, profit. These integrated care boards can extract a profit from this fixed budget. How will they do it? Well, McKinsey, the management consultants, have already drawn up a list of things that they think we shouldn't be offering on the NHS anymore. For example, cataract surgery, or maybe an arthroscopy to your knee, or varicose vein surgery. Now, none of these are doctors. In fact, McKinsey's track record, very recently, they had to pay a court settlement of $600 million without admitting liability for giving advice to Purdue Pharma, the manufacturers of OxyContin. OxyContin, the drug that has been the root cause of an opioid pandemic in America, so far costing 500,000 lives. The people remoulding the NHS were advising a drug company responsible for 500,000 deaths. They're the people in charge. They're telling us the procedures that the NHS can no longer provide. So you have a rationing. You have a rationing that can apply across the whole integrated care system, and then you have an individual-based rationing using the insurance industry's algorithms and software. So they will say to you, well, you know, you've got this wrong with you, that wrong with you, and our algorithm says you won't survive the surgery, so you're not going to have it. So you have blanket bans on treatment and individual-based bans on treatment. And what happens with the money that's left over? Shareholders, offshore bank accounts, American corporations. Now, Julian Assange said something very powerful about a decade ago about Afghanistan and endless war. He said Afghanistan is just a front for laundering the US Treasury via Afghanistan into the military-industrial complex back in the States, out of which the politicians and Washington do very well. Well, I put it to you, the NHS will become a device for laundering money out of the Treasury into these private corporations. The NHS will shrink. One way of shrinking the NHS is to close the hospitals. The other is to drive out the staff. Yeah, so all that is happening. Now, these procedures that McKinsey tell us aren't necessary anymore. Well, you would think if they're unnecessary, there's no evidence to do them. Yet the private sector can do them and charge you for it. Isn't that grievous bodily harm and fraud? Wouldn't you think it would be a ban across the whole provision of medical care? That would make sense. That's not what's going to happen. So these are mechanisms to drive people into the private sector. Waiting lists are another mechanism, very effective mechanism for driving people into the private sector. Hearing horror stories about how the NHS is failing is another reason to drive people into the private sector. And having scapegoats is a way of destroying social solidarity and social cohesion, and giving people the sense that I just need to look after myself and my family and abandon the whole principle. So these are the sort of multiple levers that are being pulled. What else can I say about the bill? The bill, in terms of denationalising the NHS, will get rid of national pay and bargaining. Right? There's also another agenda called de-skilling. That means replacing qualified staff with less qualified staff. It has happened across the public sector. Doctors will be replaced by nurses, nurses replaced by healthcare assistants replaced by volunteers. What could possibly go wrong? Now, there are two problems with that model. It's dangerous. And why is it dangerous? Let me put it to you. If the first person you see is not very well qualified or experienced, they have quite a big blind spot. The unknown unknowns become bigger. That's one problem. So they may miss more things that a more qualified person would spot. The other problem you have with inexperience is the confidence that comes with inexperience, something called the Dunning-Kruger syndrome. If you plot confidence and ability, it's not a good sight, because people with least ability but don't know very much are quite confident. Then as you learn more, you think, hang on a minute, I didn't know as much as I did. Then you become experienced, then you become expert. So we're putting people with a big blind spot and undeserved confidence in a position of huge responsibility. Now, not only is that bad for you guys, it's bad for them, because they will suffer the moral injury of knowing that they've missed somebody who's later gone on to suffer harm or death. So it's a double whammy. So the victims here aren't just the patients. The staff are stuck in this toxic situation as well. So you have this, there are various pressures to build the private insurance sector. The control of the budgets, the ICS, who's going to control the budgets is going to be the insurance companies. The legislation seeks to repeal something at the moment called Section 75, which means that everything needs to go out to competitive tendering, open to scrutiny. We don't want any tendering, but if it's going to happen, at least let's see what's going on. They want to remove that in order to enable private sector monopoly within the NHS. So Optum United Health, we've done some research on this which we hope to get published, have been the biggest people employed to train NHS leaders and local councillors. So they've been commissioned to the tune of, I think it was 17 million at least we found, to go around brainwashing everybody about how great their system is. Now, if you've been brainwashed by Optum, who do you think might be top of your list to contract to do this work when given that power to pass it over? There are some traps. What I hear from the Labour Party is very worrying, because they keep feeding us traps. One trap is the more money trap. Now, after what I've just told you, if you think the solution to the NHS's problem is more money, then please leave the room now, because that is not the problem. The bucket of the NHS has got bigger and bigger holes in it. We need to repair the holes and not pour more money in. We need to extract the parasites. If you had a tapeworm, in order for you to put on weight, the solution isn't to feed you more. It's to remove the tapeworm, yeah? So this more money argument is totally bogus, because they're wasting time not telling you what I'm telling you, which is the real game. It's the insurance industry takeover of the NHS. The NHS will become, the US version is Medicare, Medicaid. The people the insurance company don't want to touch, the poor and the elderly and the sick, are bailed out by the US taxpayer. Funnily enough, they spend more bailing these people out than we spend on the NHS per head of population. Their system is twice as expensive as ours. Their system is worse performing than ours. Their system is endemically fraudulent. I've told you about the ways they siphon money out. A study by Don Berwick, professor of health economics, I think it is, he estimated 10% of the budget goes out in fraud. The more you have contracting, the more opportunities there are for fraud. If I was so inclined and I got onto the local council's housing department and was in charge of issuing planning permissions, and I could strike up friendships with the property developers and maybe go on and work for a property developer after my stint in the council, there's a temptation to indulge in fraud. There's a lot of that going on. if you have somebody paid by the state on a salary, there isn't really much option for fraud. They can't even dodge taxes. They've got to pay PAYE, right? So the systems they're setting up, they know are dangerous, they know are more expensive, they know have worse outcomes, but they're doing it anyway. Yeah? And the Labour Party front bench are not telling you. I'm looking forward to hearing what they tell you on Tuesday. But I'm not expecting any surprises. I briefed some of the Socialist Campaign Group. They've said some good stuff, but they still haven't managed to utter the words insurance. Maybe there's a phobia, maybe I don't get it, maybe I'm not clear enough. There seems to be a reluctance to call out the elephant in the room. And I haven't got to the bottom of that yet. But I will start calling them out, because time is short. So what does it mean to my patients at the moment? So it used to be, when I first became a GP where I'm working now, once or twice a year you'd think somebody's care didn't go well, there's a problem, that was preventable. Why did that happen? Once or twice a year. This is happening on a weekly basis now. I'll give you just a couple of examples. An elderly lady had a fall, very severe back pain, went to A&E, they x-rayed her spine, sent her home. She had a spinal fracture for which she was given no pain relief, and neither was the orthopedic consultants asked to see whether she needed an operation. She was sent home. Another patient of mine, a middle-aged lady, developed painless jaundice. Painless jaundice in a middle-aged person is not a good sign. Could mean pancreatic cancer. Now that's something a medical student should tell you. This lady was sent home. Not only was she sent home, we had to struggle to get her back to another hospital where she languished on the ward for 10 days, not getting the stent to relieve her jaundice. And while she was languishing on the ward for 10 days, the staff said, please speak up because we're too frightened too. That's the state of our NHS. Another patient in his 30s, unfortunately developed bowel cancer, came to the surgery, came in, walked in, looked in a terrible state. He was covered in a drenching sweat, raging fever. He just had chemotherapy. Anybody here know what's going on? He's just had chemotherapy for a cancer, and he's got a very high fever. What's going on is his chemotherapy has knocked out his immune system. Now he has a life-threatening infection until proven otherwise. So we call an ambulance. The ambulance station is literally 2 minutes with a blue light from my surgery. Do you know how long he languished on my couch? Over an hour, during which at any time he could go into septicemic shock and die. So this is a 35-year-old, yeah? Now I'm not saying we should be allowing anybody to die. Nobody is safe in this system. We're all just one accident away from needing these services. So that's the reality on the ground, and what I want to do then is, if we got that next bit lined up, this section of the film just puts a bit more flesh on the end game. So.
But when you are coming home every day, exhausted, emotionally, physically, financially, increasingly, you start to weigh up whether or not it's worth it.
In a survey of junior doctors by the Royal College of Physicians, 70% worked from a rota that was permanently understaffed. 80% felt their work put them under excessive stress, and a quarter felt it had a serious impact on their mental health.
The clinical commissioning groups, the state-owned insurance pools on which the new system is based, are officially under the control of GPs. So it's GPs that are going to be scapegoated when the system fails to provide any healthcare in the future. The insurance industry has contributed the man who now heads the NHS, the independent NHS, which takes very little instruction from government. And that man is Simon Stevens of the American insurance company United Health.
Simon Stevens was the guy who was president of United's global operations. These are very big parts of these big corporations that are not widely understood. And they're looking to see how they can get enmeshed into the healthcare systems of other countries. The UK in particular, they've had a presence in the UK for many years. They operate behind the scenes. They're usually behind the scenes consultants to the Prime Minister or someone in his or her cabinet to advise them one way or another. Of course, if they are coming out of a big for-profit insurance corporation in the US, they have a bias. HMO stands for Health Maintenance Organization. For a good number of years, it didn't have a negative connotation. But when the big for-profit insurance companies began to buy them up and enroll, and in fact, more or less force people into HMOs, they did it in a very ham-fisted way. And there was a big pushback against HMOs, and it came to have a very negative connotation.
We have now narrowed down the present problems on this thing for one issue, and that is whether we can include these health maintenance organizations like Mr. Kaiser's permitting thing. Now let me ask you, you give me this, you know I'm not too keen on it, you stand up. This is a private enterprise one. Now that's a for profit. And the reason he can do it, I had Mr. Kaiser come in and talk to me about this, and I went into it someday. All the incentives are toward less medical care, because the less care they give them, the more money they make.
I am proposing today a new national health strategy. The purpose of this program is simply this. I want America to have the finest health care in the world. And I want every American to be able to have that care when he needs it.
Because of the negative connotation of HMOs, a more recent acronym is ACO, which stands for Accountable Care Organizations. And they're similar, there's some differences, but they essentially are pretty much what the old HMOs were.
In 2014, Stevens produced his 5-year forward view, presented as a modernisation plan for the NHS. But in reality, it's a blueprint to take us to the American healthcare system model. We will have the mass closure of hospitals and the formation of provider chains and networks of hospitals, which will be taken over by corporations. In primary care, we will see mass closure of surgeries, down from over 8,000 surgeries in 2010 to around 1,500. And the staff are also being prepared for privatisation. We're seeing the wages slashed and also downskilling, replacing qualified staff with less qualified staff. The result will be a cheaper workforce for their new employers. And all this vandalism is being paid for by the taxpayer.
At the moment, there is quite intensive marketing of private health insurance schemes to various people, and it's perhaps becoming increasingly tempting to go for that as the headlines come out explaining how awful the NHS is these days. The downside of it, of course, is that if you are seriously ill, the health insurers aren't interested in you at all, and you can't even get insurance. So during this transitional phase, a special arrangement called personal health budgets has been set up, which is intended to make sure that people who are seriously ill don't go anywhere near trying to get care from insurance companies.
The American health insurers are already here. Since 2003, United Health Group, and through its subsidiary Optum, has been awarded NHS contracts across England to provide prescribing decision support software, management of GP referrals to hospitals, and crucially, to implement policy to redesign the NHS. United Health Optum is ideally positioned to capture control of NHS budgets allocated to GPs via their registered patient lists. Most doctors remain unaware of the privatisation plan for the NHS, which remarkably is fully endorsed by the British Medical Association. Stephen's NHS long-term plan will complete the transition to the American system, introducing financial incentives to deny patients care through a shared savings scheme, copying United Health's own shared savings program.
Many of the changes that this plan sets out are already happening somewhere in the NHS, and now they need to happen everywhere across the NHS.
All the incentives are toward less medical care because people less care is given for more money.
What work have you done that will ensure that that work is continued to really be done by the NHS? Or is NHS just going to become a badge?
No, we are suggesting that the integrated care should be public providers.
I'm just going to be much more concrete, right? There's no privatisation of the NHS on my watch, and the integrated care contracts will go to public sector bodies to deliver the NHS in public hands.
Look, I think everything with the trade deal is on the table. When you're dealing in trade, everything's on the table. So NHS or anything else, or a lot more than that. But everything will be on the table, absolutely.
The ultimate game for the insurance industry in taking control of the NHS is to ruin it because it's unpleasant competition.
Their aim is the American model, massively inefficient, massively divisive, massively unequal.
Simon Stevens will be there presiding over the breakdown of the system and controlling public opinion so that blame is never placed in the correct place, that people see the NHS as failing them, as not fit for purpose, and become keener and keener on putting money in the direction of his old bosses, the American insurance industry.
When there is no paediatric service available at the local hospital and the worried parent has to try and drive 40 miles with an unwell child in the back of a car, the difference between waiting for an ambulance in a rural community and waiting for one in an inner city is very different. And when you have a child with meningitis, when you have a critically ill child, the parents are unwilling to wait, and so they bring the child along to the local emergency department where the service is no longer available to support them. Patients are suffering in silence. They don't understand what is going on locally. They can't comprehend that a government would want to try and dismantle the National Health Service. And they still have the belief that it exists. They have the belief that it's always there for them.
Per 100,000, the number of deaths in this country is still one of the very worst in the world. How many deaths could have been avoided with quick action in excess of 100,000?
Life saved.
Yeah.
Because I know there will be many people looking now at our current success.
Leaders from all three main parties have, over the last 30 years, been enabling the corporate capture of the NHS, whilst claiming to support it. The destruction of the nation's finest achievement is the greatest betrayal of the public interest.
When they meet in Davos in Switzerland, that's what they're deciding. These people will be poverty-stricken all their lives, but we will all have the riches. And I have another yacht in the Mediterranean, if you don't mind.
So, I think we'll open up for questions now, yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yes, let's have contributions from the floor now. I did work in the NHS for 40 years in the finance function, so I saw all of this happening. I also know that the NHS finance function under the Healthcare Financial Management Association has got a very, very strong link with the US and sends finance staff over to the US to see how they run their healthcare systems on the basis that there are things that we can learn from them. And when I challenged them why they didn't visit other countries, it was suggested perhaps I'd like to sort that out. And that emphasis on the US remains within the finance function in the NHS. So the whole system, yes, is inured to this approach and this dream of an American-style healthcare system. And of course, we heard this morning, for those of you that were in the monetary theory session, about the crisis of capitalism. And of course, the NHS is worth around 120 billion a year. So as well as the other benefits that you've talked about in terms of data and property, that is a lot of money. So let's have some contributions and questions from the floor. I can hardly see you, I'm afraid. Somebody over there?
My name's Charles. So which groups and political parties have you seen actually campaigning against this? Are there anybody that you've seen campaigning against this?
How depressed do you want to get? So, Lib Dem Tory coalition 2012 brought in the Health and Social Care Act. Tony Blair brought in PFI, further introduced the market, outsourced clinical care for the first time. So all three major parties in office since Thatcher's time, really, have done whatever they can to undermine the NHS. Remember, Thatcher said her greatest achievement was Tony Blair and New Labour. Well, she wasn't joking. Campaign groups, there's a problem with campaign groups, as we know with the recent events in the Labour Party. The memberships are fine, it's the leaderships. So you can look at, I'll name them, Keep Our NHS Public, one of the biggest campaign groups for the NHS, been going years, aren't very successful, right? But their function isn't to succeed. Their function is to waste campaigners' time, to demoralize them, get them repeating totally bogus arguments like we need more money, for example, right? And towing the right-wing Labour line, yeah? When anybody wants to get the truth out, they're not welcome. I'll give you an example of what I've experienced personally. So in 2015, I wanted to stand as chair of Keep Our NHS Public. The day before an AGM, they withdrew my membership and tried to bar me from entering the building. Does that sound familiar? Yeah? This same tactic is across NHS defence. So there's also a problem with good people. Good people think everybody else is good and underestimate the ruthless depths to which they will sink, fabricate stuff, make up lies, smear. Now, we were hearing about smears today. I've been smeared. I've had meetings of mine cancelled. I won't tell you what the smear is, but maybe later on. I went to a Labour Party meeting in East London before the 2019 election, and they were discussing a motion to support Chris Williamson. And there was 100 people there. I thought, they've come to see me. Obviously they hadn't. There was so much passion about what was going on with this anti-Semitism witch hunt. And I listened, and there's a lot of emotion in the room. So I did my 15 minutes. And I said, look what I've laid out to you guys. You spent half an hour discussing this bogus anti-Semitism witch hunt. And it erupted. Right? I got called an anti-Semite. The meeting, there were almost chairs thrown around. I couldn't believe it. The chairwoman said, you must apologise or this meeting's over. I was getting evils from the sitting MP who thought I was the Christ reincarnate, the devil reincarnate. And I thought, do I finish giving my message, or do I say, sod you lot, if you can't handle the truth, I'm off. I thought, I'll do this as experience, let me see how it goes, yeah? So you are a wonderful audience. That night, it was pretty hostile, right? At least half the audience was hostile. So I said, look, I'm sorry if that comment upset anyone, and then I finished my story. And then it kicked off when the meeting ended, yeah? Now, so they will use any tactic to shut down the truth. They will attack people, and that also filters through into campaign groups. So who can we listen to? The problem with Keep Our NHS Public is because they've been around so long, that the new groups go to them by default and think these people know what they're talking about, yeah? That is their function, to mislead. That is their function, right? So they've been very effective. Now, if you were billionaire corporate interests, wouldn't you try and nobble the opposition? It's a no-brainer. But trying to explain that to good people on the left, we have a genetic defect whereby we are overly naive and will not listen to warnings given by others until we experience the pain ourselves. That, oh, hang on a minute, maybe there was some truth in that. Yeah. Now, that flaw is also our asset. We're compassionate people. We like to give people the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. But we are dangerously naive. Not nobody in this room, obviously, right? But that's an Achilles heel. And when things go wrong, people become spineless, as we heard earlier on today. Where's the solidarity? I keep hearing this word. I hardly ever see it. Yeah. So when in that 2015 meeting at the Keep Our NHS Public AGM, there were two motions from my group. One was supporting a very high-profile whistleblower, Chris Day, and one was condemning the BMA for not fighting for the junior doctors at that time. Both reasonable things to put, but they didn't want them discussed. So I was persona non grata, right? So pick your groups carefully. If your group you're attracted to, if your local group is probably legit, the membership, it's the leadership you've got to watch closely, right? If the leadership do not tell you United Health, Optum, Simon Stevens, insurance industry takeover, you need new leaders. Yeah, that's the test. Do these people nail the problem? If they don't, you need to do something. Do these people fall into traps of more money? Or do they make this self-defeating argument, let's give everybody a pay rise, without first appealing to why it makes sense to the patient to pay people well, right? It makes sense to pay people well. You retain them, you motivate them, you attract other people, you attract high-quality people, yeah? So there is a mutual self-interest in paying nurses well. But is that ever made by the unions? No, it isn't. Why not? There's a mental block. Yeah, so I want to hear a reasonable argument. If somebody said to me, look, here's the evidence that a private health system works much better, all right, then go for it. But it doesn't. The reason, this is the only country which had universal health care, free at the point of use, funded through taxation first, and it was a huge success. And they've been trying to destroy it ever since. Groups that I think are doing some good work. One group is Every Doctor, who not only have campaigned on the PPE issue, they're supporting whistleblowers. They're also doing a campaign to counter the right-wing GP attack, which we predicted 2 years ago, although the reason has changed. You need scapegoats, right? And you need to call people out, and they're gently calling people out. I'm trying to get them to heat up the rhetoric a little bit because time is short. So Every Doctor is good. I think We Own It are good, but they're listening to the wrong people, but they do some good work. And local campaign groups, yeah? If you can suss out your leaders, and if they're good, support them. If they're not, the membership need to get rid of them. Yeah? Hope that answers your question.
I can also suggest that you join the Socialist Health Association, and the leaflet here has got details on how you can do that. Another question from back.
Can I just come back on the organisations? I'll give you a story. So, if you follow my Twitter, you might find it. There was a doctor called Dr. Clive Pidell, who formed his own party called the National Health Action Party. Right? Great idea, right? So, attracted a few good doctors and other activists, myself and David on the front row here, but it never chose effective messaging. And you go along for a couple of years, think, oh, they're nice people, but they're incompetent. That same trap. What I'm accusing others of, I was guilty of as well, right? But at least I learned after a few years, this is what's going on, yeah? He put out a Twitter thread praising Simon Stevens. Now, did he become an idiot recently, or was he always an idiot setting up this parliamentary party to waste people's time? You can make up your own minds, but that's the level of disinformation and the tactics that are out there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jerry Gould, a former GMB rep at Sussex County Hospital and a former NHS worker. I'd like to come back to the unions. I mean, firstly, Aaron Bevan came from being a terrible miner to being a brilliant politician, and where the NHS came from was eager miners' welfare. So I think we need to start with the trades unions. As a ward-based rep, I was a technical support for the clinical staff. I wasn't clinical myself. Everybody was asking for help. Everybody was asking for representation. I was even passing information on to people like the RCN. Now, what the problem is that when my union, the GMB, were in the process of being de-recognised by the new trust, I was leaving anyway. This was just a process. Another rep has been retired, and basically the reps are being isolated and demoralised. And when you come back to the solidarity thing, one thing we already have in common with the United States, apart from this progressive privatisation, is the fact that we're now down to about 20% trades union membership amongst working people. If anybody says anything to me, you want to organise, join a fucking union, right? Be a member of a trades union, be a union activist, and be prepared to put your head above the parapet. Those of us who do it find that the people around us would like representation, but they don't want to stand next to us when the shit hits the fan. And that is the problem. It comes back to solidarity. If you don't have solidarity, you have nothing.
Yeah, no, I agree. You have to organise on some level. Maybe it's my imagination, but I think we had a bit more spine back in the 70s when I was growing up. You know? I'll give you an example of spinelessness. So I went to a GP clinical commissioning group meeting, and I thought, is it just me? So I'm gonna speak to everybody in the over coffee, 10-15 minutes, getting people's views. I'm saying, how are you finding it? Do you have a problem? Is there trouble getting services, this, that, and the other? Are you happy with the direction of travel? They more or less agreed with me, right? So I went in there and I was going to confront the GP chair, former Labour MP, as it happens, Howard Stoke. And I said to him, look, you're presenting us with this Disneyland version of reality, right? That everything's getting better and we can spend less money. That's nonsense. Things are getting worse and you're spending more money. It's the exact opposite, right? And I said, all my colleagues here agree with me. Put your hands up, everybody who agrees with me outside. Did one hand go up? Right? It's shocking. So, yeah, I think we need to relearn the lessons that, our parents and grandparents learned the hard way. We've forgotten how to fight. And I think it doesn't help that we, mainstream media brainwashes us and creates a fantasy of justice, but that doesn't exist. There are also some psychological flaws that we have for survival. One of them is trusting in authority and leaders. I think there was a psychiatrist or psychologist, Milgram, done some work in the 70s looking into how was it that good people allowed the Nazis to rise in Germany. And he worked out there's an evolutionary benefit to believing in your leader and following your leader. Now, when we were living in tribes, the leader was generally the biggest bloke who was the best hunter, right? That's your survivor. We don't have leaders like that. We have the worst among us leading, right? So when you have malign leadership, what used to be an evolutionary advantage becomes a disadvantage. And we need to be aware of that. And the other is the just world fallacy. So in order to protect ourselves psychologically, we construct things, we perceive things in a way that is least psychologically challenging. I'll give you an example. If your neighbour wins the lottery, you will say, oh, he was a good bloke. He deserves that luck. Yeah? If your neighbour gets convicted wrongly of manslaughter, you say, I knew his eyes, he had evil eyes, right? Because you can then make sense of the outcome. Yeah? And these psychological flaws, conformity, following leaders, not rocking the boat, we all have them, but we need to point them out and try and overcome them, not pretend they don't exist.
Thank you, Bob. Olivia.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Felicity. I think what surprises me is that people are surprised. This is an Anglo-American empire. They have a very efficient military-industrial complex, and we've seen since the time of Thatcher how she completely reversed, because there was that acceptability. It didn't matter whether you were on the left or the right, but there was that acceptability that the NHS was an entity that would remain. One side wanted it to grow and develop, the other wanted to try and prevent as much growth and development. So I am surprised that people are surprised, especially with PFI and what have you. That was Brown, wasn't it? Brown wanted to hide it from the Treasury books, keep it off the books of the Treasury. So my question is, I think that all that I've been hearing, because also World Transformed and here, that it seems as though you need a revolution. I mean, we are in the process anyway of revolutionary times with the move from Western Empire to the East. And so in revolutionary, when empires are losing, they become the more maniacal, they become more outrageous, more military. So my question really is not to do with that. My question is, you see now in the United States, and you see Bernie Sanders, you even see Biden taking on this quest for a more unified health service. I mean, I don't know whether you think that is going to progress. And will it be at the expense, if so, of our health service? I don't know.
No, it's a good question. I've been following that stuff closely. There's a YouTube comedian called Jimmy Dore who's done lots of very good work exposing the charade of the progressives in America. There was an opportunity where 6 or so supposedly progressive Democrats held the balance of power. And what Jimmy Dore and others were saying is, let's have a vote on the House of the Congress where they held the balance of power, which would make all these politicians vote on Medicare for all. They refused to do it. All these people who were trumpeting how great universal healthcare would be didn't do it. And it was only a gesture anyway, it wouldn't have become law. So these people, like Bernie Sanders as well, I'm afraid, jumped the wrong way. There have been nationwide demonstrations and campaigns for single payer, none of them attended. Yeah? So something's got to them. Either he was taken in a dark room and told to behave himself, I don't know, I'm only guessing. But there are very powerful forces at work now. If ever the US were going to get healthcare, it would have been in a pandemic. They haven't got it. They still don't have it. Everything they do is designed to maximize either profit for the insurers, who've done very well out of the pandemic, or the drug companies, who've done very well out of the pandemic. Still no talk of universal single payer. Even single payer it's an advance for them. But all it means is the taxpayer funds the insurers to fleece the taxpayer, right? You don't need these people, yeah? The whole thing that's happened is they've shoehorned this massive army of people who are totally unnecessary for the delivery of healthcare.
Yeah, we did the same though, didn't we, with our management?
Yeah,
when we expanded
exactly.
management at the NHS, I mean, that was...
Yeah, that is the point. So, but you can't privatise it without that bureaucratic layer, who not only do they force through policy, but they make sure the staff behave, keep an eye on the staff, and make sure everything's covered up. So what happens when a whistleblower in the NHS speaks out? They lose their career. What happens to the people who caused the harm that they spoke out about? They get promoted. Yeah? And then we all pick up the pieces. How many scandals have we had? Mid Staffordshire, Telford and Shrewsbury, Margate Maternity. There's a common denominator. They've tried to save costs, they've demoralised the staff, they've created a recruitment and retention problem, which is not a problem to management because it's a cheaper wage bill. Yeah, what is a problem to us is not a problem to them.
But so what's the answer? I mean, apart from having a revolution.
Well, no.
I mean, a revolution in...
Let me know when we get started. Send me a text. I'll be there. No, I think you're right. You know, because pleading with our oppressors hasn't got us anywhere, yeah? So we're going to need something pretty radical, but the radical starts with informing enough people. That's where I come in. Any change required a small committed percentage of the population to make change. It didn't require 99% to make change. It was, in the single figures percent of well-informed, courageous and committed people, yeah? And they're the people I'm trying to flush out with information.
Yeah, so I think that's what we're trying to do over the course of these events, really, to equip people with information, to build networks and so forth across the left.
But there is information. Have we got the socialist group of MPs?
Yeah.
Why aren't they speaking?
We've got time for like one or two just really quick questions. Thank you. Back here, and then you, sir.
Hi, Chris Williamson. We've got our own version of the Fraud Squad, and that's the Socialist Campaign Group. They're an utter waste of space. The red flag has a line in it. They're the cowards flinch and traitors sneer. The Parliamentary Labour Party is entirely made up of cowards and traitors, I regret to say. And so it's going to fall to us, and we're making a small start with this Resist event here at the Labour Party conference this week. We've got the Festival of Resistance coming up in Nottingham on the 16th and 17th of October, which Bob is going to be speaking at as well. But it's going to be down to us. We have to come together. And that whole issue of solidarity, don't look to these MPs. We should never have looked to them anyway. Don't look to leaders. We all need to be our own leaders, and we need to inspire each other. We need to build a movement. That's what was so inspiring, I think, about Jeremy Corbyn when he became the leader, because he talked about building a movement, and then it all fell away. And some of us who put our heads above the parapet and defended Jeremy's Praetorian Guard, as a Praetorian Guard, were being thrown under the bus systematically, and then I was ultimately thrown under the bus. And that spinelessness that that Bob has spoken about is absolutely there in spades, I've got to say. So it's going to be down to us, and whether it be a revolution, I do not know. But one of the other things, two things really I want to ask Bob about is, first of all, a kind of a request really. Tax doesn't fund our public services, so this notion of taxpayers' money is a bit of a misnomer. Tax is not, money is not the issue. Funding is not a problem. We are our own. We have our own sovereign country, so we can create the money if we need it. It's the systems that we need to sort out, and I think we're all agreed that we need to plug those holes in the bucket that you mentioned. comrade over here talked about the trade union, so I won't, repeat that point. But in some ways, we mustn't allow this to become a council of despair, because you think, Christ, what can we do? It's just the bloody problem's too big. And do we need, I just wonder, Bob, do we need a version of Extinction Rebellion, an NHS rebellion or something, to really gain the attention? Because nobody's listening to us, and the campaign groups out there are actually, as you say, seem to be set up to actually sap that energy. And I just think we're therefore, obviously get involved in this. It's great that people are coming today, not enough of us. Come to the Festival of Resistance, but let's build that movement so that we can actually, not just save our National Health Service, but save the bloody country.
Yeah, no, I agree with the tax point. We did discover a magic money tree for Serco and Deloitte. We discovered 22 billion overnight. We discovered, was it 600 billion for the banks? Where did that all come from? So yeah, it's not a lack of resource that's the issue. It's a lack of will to give everybody a decent life. In terms of movement, the Labour Party, I think, people's hope over experience is wasting a lot of good people's time. I can't see anything happening in the short term in the Labour Party to change my view on that. So yeah, whatever I can do to help inform people and get them asking the right questions and saying the right things to create a general awareness, I will do what I can. But I can certainly identify either the ignorant or the deliberately set self-defeating messaging that's coming out time and time and time again. So yeah, I think if there are many local campaign groups on the NHS across the country, if we can reach out and inform them that you're currently barking up the wrong tree, the big threat isn't to your A&E department, although that is real, but use that threat to paint the bigger picture, which is close the A&E, get people desperate so they go running off to the insurers. That's the bigger picture.
Thanks, Bob. Final contribution from this gentleman here.
Yeah, my name's Stan. I work for the NHS for 37 years or so. Good Law Project is actually quite good, and they have run quite a lot of, they're actually currently getting the government to actually reveal some of the texts that were put, and they're getting hold of phones. So they seem to be very legit, and I find it quite good. I mean, what you're basically describing is Noam Chomsky's How to Privatise the NHS. That's that, yeah, and I think that if that's put forward, then people can see exactly what it was, and you can see the defund. People become upset, people then demand changes, and then they change. I mean, it's a very, very schematic way of dealing with it, and it is simple. I understand it. So the origins actually predate certainly Simon Stevens. In America, you're looking at a thing called the Oregon Experiment, which I think was in the 80s, which basically they were giving money. And what actually kept on happening was, there was a 4-year-old kid that was denied leukemia because he didn't hit all the tick boxes, and he ended up dying as a consequence. Bernie Saunders last night with John McDonnell was really, I thought he was really good. I don't know if anyone else went, but and he was really positive, but he actually was saying that he's getting a lot of resistance from the insurance companies, the health insurance companies. He's still pushing for that. So I felt really quite positive that there was going to be change within Biden, who he described as a good person. I think he described him as, but he actually, he's obviously been part of the Senate or wherever he's part of, and has been a career politician. The other thing also with the GP practices, they're not generally run by GPs, they're actually run by private companies, and that people are not necessarily aware of that. You mentioned about the integrated care organisations. what's different now is that the insurance companies or the providers, Optum, are actually going to get a massive say on where the money's spent, and they'll be treated as the experts. And people are not aware of that, and I was certainly aware of the 42, or what were they called? No, they were called, right at the beginning, they were called footprints. Yes, absolutely, and you know that, and they were given £500 million, and that's all they could actually spend, because there was the £18 billion budget, and they had to go within it. So I mean, it's all been there, but people haven't really publicised it. Certainly the Labour Party certainly hasn't, and I've certainly broached that in the local constituency, and people were totally unaware of what was going on, and you know, sort of, well, I don't know this before, and these were councillors that have been councillors for many, many years. So I've got a question, but I made sort of comments.
Some observations. Thank you.
Yeah, so in fact, the assault on the NHS began in 1948, called the Fellowship for Freedom in Medicine, sponsored by the insurance industry. So, you know, it's been there from the start. In terms of Biden being a good guy, well, ask the 2 million people locked up in American prisons for legal changes he made with Bill Clinton. Ask the people in Libya, ask the people in Yemen, ask the people in Syria. None of these are good guys.
Yeah, but he wasn't the leader. I do think you can't...
He hasn't come out against it, has he?
Well, I mean, he has actually said that...
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to have to close this session now.
Yeah, so...
He said he made a mistake, so, I mean, you know...
But he hasn't rectified it yet. And they haven't done away with the deportation camps on the Mexican border. So none of these are good guys. They're in bed with the corporations. They receive a lot of funding from the corporations, and they will never do anything to upset the corporations.
So I think we've had a really informative and useful discussion and information this afternoon. So thank you so much for coming. We'll send out the link to the film so you can watch it in full, and clearly this is a really important issue. It stands at the heart of our campaign as socialists. So look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you all.